Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to talk about tightening the clutch basket nut and the primary drive nut, and then installing the clutch plates. Let's spend some time on this clutch basket. The issue with tightening this nut is this inner basket is keyed to this shaft, and if you attempt to tighten it with just putting a wrench on here and torque it, it simply wants to spin. Now there are a couple of ways to go about securing this inner basket so that you can put a torque wrench on it. My preferred method, frankly, is to take two clutch plates, one of the steels and one of the fibers, bolt them together, and then slip them over the top. And what I mean by that is here is some of the clutch plates out of the Suzuki TS185 I restored a few years ago. And you can see what I did here is I simply took one of the fibers and one of the steels, indexed them together, bolted them together, and then, now obviously this won't fit on this clutch, but it would slide over like that, and it would lock between these tabs around the perimeter on the fiber, and the steel plate indexing into the notches on the inner hub. It essentially locks these two hubs together. Then it becomes a matter of preventing the whole assembly, like you can see here, from turning, which is quite easily done actually. You can put a penny in here where the two gears engaged, and I'll get a better shot of that here in a second, like a penny, something copper and about the right diameter. It'll wedge in there when you torque it, and then you can reverse the spin on the clutch and the penny will pop out. You can use a clean shop rag and you can wedge it in here, and it'll serve the same purpose. That is, it will wedge into the gears. It won't damage anything, and you can then apply torque with the torque wrench. The only issue really with the shop rag is it tends to leave fabric, bits of fabric behind that you got to pick out of the gear mechanism and make sure it's clean and blow it out. I've used both methods in the past. That's my preferred way of doing it. On this machine, this motor, I won't be able to do that because I am not going to be replacing all the clutch plates. I did order new fiber plates. The steels I'm going to reuse, and I don't want to deface or drill holes in the original steel plates, so I'm going to try to preserve those. So this process I just alluded to won't work, or I'm not going to use rather, on this engine. It would work, but I don't want to damage the steel plates. Here's a similar clutch tool, by the way, for the Kawasaki H2 I did about 7 years or so ago. Same idea. I took the steel and the fiber, this happens to be the steel on the top, bolted them together, and used the same technique I just described. This is for the H2, and I have a set of clutch plates like this for virtually every engine that I've ever restored. At least that was my own. There are other ways to go about it, one of which we'll talk about in a minute. I've heard of people clamping these together with vice grips and tightening them and wedging screwdrivers in and all those kind of things. I certainly am not going to do that. That's way too heavy-handed for my tastes. If that works for you, then have at it. This is a 53-year-old engine. It's small. It's a 100cc. It's delicate. I don't want to take a chance of breaking any of these fingers off around the perimeter here that you can see, wedging something in there. I'm going to take a different approach. There is a commercially made tool available, and I'll show you that in just a second, but first I'm going to move the camera. When I talk about wedging something in, I'm really talking about this joint here between the primary drive nut and the clutch basket bevels that you see right here. And if you wedge, again, a penny, which is basically copper, or shop rag, the tolerance here is so tight, it'll wedge when you torque it, and it will actually prevent this assembly from turning. It actually works quite well. The other option, commercially made tool, this is one of several varieties that you can get that is made to lock or hold that inner clutch basket. And those fingers you see on the left are designed to engage in the inner clutch basket. It's a vice grip type tool. I think in the UK we might call that a mole grips. And you hold that, you lock those fingers on the left side, on the left hand side, into the clutch basket. You tighten the handles together, you hold that with one hand and torque it with the other. I don't have one of those tools. I've really never needed one. I just typically use the bolt the clutch plates together technique. I don't have to then keep an extra specialty tool around. I've just never needed one, but I am well aware they're available. So that brings us back full circle to how are we going to lock this clutch basket assembly so we can tighten these two nuts. Well, I'm going to make a tool out of a piece of plywood, and I will show you that process and how it's going to work next. So what I'm going to do here is take a piece of plywood. This is just some scrap plywood I had left over from the crate that my mini mill came in when I bought it a couple of years ago. It's approximately 13/16 inches thick, or about 10 millimeter. These are nominal numbers. I don't take them too literally, but I put a caliper on it real quickly and just measured it. The size, the overall dimensions aren't critical. I just cut this out real quick on my bandsaw to start with. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the inner hub like this, trace around it in such a way, and then taper it over like this and create a handle that I can hold. Then I'm going to locate the center here. I have to drill a hole through so that I can get the socket that will fit down over the nut. This is a 19 millimeter nut, by the way, and the outside dimensions of this socket is approximately 1 inch or 25 millimeter. So I have a 1 inch hole saw here that I'm going to use. Once I mark and center this, then I can use the hole saw to drill a hole through the plywood. The next step then will be to locate these 5 holes, because I have to drill holes through the plywood. Because remember now, this is going to sit on top like that. For these are 5 millimeter bolts. I'll come back to that in a minute. So that I can bolt the piece of plywood in using these screws. Now, as it turns out, I have to use these screws. And that surprised me. And I was thinking they were standard 5 millimeter by 0.8 pitch. They're not. This is a specialty thread. I found out through some trial and error to determine what was going on. My original thinking was I would just get some long 8 millimeter standard, rather 5 millimeter bolts, and drill holes and just use those as temporary means to secure the plywood to the inner clutch hub. Well, since these aren't a standard thread, they seem to be a 5 millimeter by 0.9 pitch, which is available. They're considered a specialty item. I've never come across them before, but I did look them up, and they are available, believe it or not. I can't reproduce this thread, so I've got to use these bolts. Well, the problem with that is they're fixed in height, of course, so I have to find the sweet spot of being able to go through the plywood yet retain enough material here that I'm threading into when the plywood fits under like this, that I don't take a chance of damaging or these threads or breaking out one of these bosses. That was a little twist I wasn't expecting, but I think we're going to get through okay. I'm going to just do a minor countersink so that when these clutch bolts go through, they'll set something like, if I can get that there, like that, thereabouts. It's not critical, but thereabouts. One might ask the question, why on earth would Yamaha have put a specialty thread on here? Well, it's pure speculation on my part, but my guess would be is these fasteners, these bolts, these clutch spring bolts, Yamaha wanted to make sure some young adolescent, some young teenager was fiddling around with his engine, lost one of these and didn't simply replace it with a standard 8mm bolt, which is, we've all encountered this, is very typical with teenagers, myself included, back in the day. They wanted to make sure you were forced to use this particular bolt with the shoulders and the steps and the right fastener for the clutch springs. I suspect that would be their motivation. Problem with that thinking is they underestimated, I believe, the tenacity of the teenagers working on these bikes, and they would just force fit something in this aluminum anyway, whether it be an imperial thread like a 1/4 inch, or even if they were to come up with an 8mm 0.88 pitch, they're going to force it in anyway, really essentially defeating, I think, the purposes of having a specialty bolt. But that's just conjecture on my part as to why they would have done that. Maybe someone else knows better than I do, but I think they wanted to force you to use this particular special shoulder bolt. Okay, with that out of the way, what we're going to do now is we're going to essentially lay this out. Again, I'm going to trace around, and then I'll taper this like this, cut it on the bandsaw, and make a handle. The only purpose the gray paint serves is to increase contrast and visibility for shooting of this video. I typically wouldn't have done that, but I thought it'd be a little easier for video purposes for the audience to see, especially when it comes to the whole layout, what I'm doing. Now, it's not super critical from a tolerancing perspective that this center hole is exactly dead nuts on center. If I was making a permanent tool, say out of a piece of 1/4 inch aluminum or 3/8 aluminum or steel, I would put a lot more effort into make sure everything is perfect. And in order to do that, to get the perfect center of this hole, I'd have to get into math, trig, or geometry. You could figure it out that way. Probably would just put it up on my mini mill and use the DRO, or digital readout, and the built-in capabilities of the DRO to locate a 5-bolt hole pattern and then the center of that hole pattern, and then just drill it on the mill. I'm not going to set this all up on the mill. It'd take me far longer to get it all set up and get it in place for a temporary tool like this versus just spending the 15-20 minutes, maybe a half hour, doing this by hand. If I wasn't shooting a video, I could do this very quickly, but obviously I'm pausing and talking through the details. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to locate this. Again, it doesn't make any difference really as long as there's plenty of material all the way around, because I'm going to cut it out anyway. In order to do that, you can use a marker, a pencil, anything you want. I think what I'm going to use is just a red Sharpie. Now I need to hold that in that position, because now I'm going to start marking for the center and the 5 hold down. In order to locate the center hole, I'm not going to get real sophisticated. I just took a large drill that's approximately the same size. It was a little bit on the loose side, so you can see I just wrapped I think a single wrap of masking tape around, so that just fits like that. Then I'm going to take a mallet and just smack the end of this and put a dimple in the piece of plywood. Now I'm going to leave that like that for now. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take a punch and I'm going to go around and I'm going to mark in a similar fashion. I'm not going to use quite as much force with this, but I'm going to use the punch, which just fits nicely through those holes, and mark the 5 hole locations. Now I've got the center located nominally, and then the 5 holes located for the hold down bolts. I'm going to take that away. You probably can't see it quite as well as I can, but I've got the location right there for the center hole, and then I can see the hold down bolt marks right here, here, gotta get it just right here, etc., all the way around. Again, I know that probably doesn't show up for you very well, but for me, I can see it here pretty well. So now I'm going to take this over to the drill press, and I'm going to use this 1-inch hole saw, drill that out. Then I'll use a series of drills to drill the holes to line up with these. And keep in mind, I'm going to countersink these just a little bit. Real quickly, I thought I'd show you the 5 holes. I just circled them with a red Sharpie or marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as center hole. I circled them to make it a little easier for you to see. They do show up better in person than they do on the camera. This shows the basic setup over on the drill press. I don't believe I've ever showed this drill press in videos before. I really never had much of a reason to, I don't think, at least being used. Got it in my vise, obviously. A piece of sacrificial wood is underneath for drilling purposes, and is clamped securely. You can see I accentuated the 5 holes, or the 6 holes. I think you can probably see those a little bit better now. So what I'm going to do now is do a pilot hole drill all the way around, including the center, and then I'll work my way up to 1/4 inch for these holes first, and then counter drill for the shoulder of the bolt, and then countersink for the bolt head to set in, probably 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch into the face. And then this hole, the center hole, just be drilled eventually just to a 1-inch size to allow for the socket to pass through. So I'm not going to show every one of these holes. I'll just show representative drilling, because once you've seen one, you've pretty much seen them all. I'm going to use a spade bit to countersink for this bit for this head. Problem with spade bits is they don't create a very clean hole. I would prefer to use a Forstner style bit, which I don't have. I don't use those tools. I'm not a woodworker, and I have no reason to keep a high quality Forstner tool in my inventory. So I'm just going to have to use a spade bit. I do have the depth stop set on this opposite side here so I can be consistent in depth. And there you see the first one is done. Again, I went through the entire sequence with a 1 bolt just to show the process. Now I'll duplicate that for these other 4, and then I'll come back and do the center hole. Okay, we got all the holes drilled. I did check I did a test fit on the inner clutch basket, and it fits fine. The socket goes through with no interference to allow for torquing. So the next step then is I'm going to lay out a little handle here, freehand. It'll look something like that. And then I'll cut this out on the bandsaw. So that gives me something then to hold on to while I torque those nuts down. Okay, I don't pretend to be Joe Artist here, so I'm just going to do something like this. Well, there's our finished tool. Not the prettiest thing you probably have ever seen, but it should be functional. I've got the nut here installed with the lock washer underneath it. Obviously this nut's installed, so we're going to bolt this tool, this basket holder tool, down to this inner basket using the standard screws. Then I can torque this nut down, and I can also torque that nut down by, let me reposition the camera. There's a standard US penny, it's copper. When I apply torque, it will twist in and bind and allow me to complete the torquing of these nuts. And then to get it out, I just will reverse rotation like that. I think I indicated before that the standard torque on these 12 millimeter bolts is 35, it's actually 34 foot-pounds. But due to the age of the engine and the fact that I'm using anti-seize, I'm going to back that off. I think I'm going to go up to 28 foot-pounds initially, see how that feels to me. I might bump it up to 29 or 30. I won't go over 30 foot-pounds on either one of these nuts. So you can see there how this will work. I can control the position. As I'm going to be tightening clockwise, this is going to want to go this way, away from the kickstart shaft. My initial torque settings on this torque wrench is 20 foot-pounds. That's 20, 28. I think I'm just going to go up to 29 on this one, which is 5 pounds less than the recommended. $29 foot-pounds. So now I'm going to wedge an old penny. This happens to be a very beat-up penny that shouldn't probably be in circulation anymore. I'm going to wedge that right in here and begin my torquing. I'm going to start at 20 foot-pounds and work my way up to probably 28 or 29. Up to 25. And then we're going to finish with 29. Now remove the basket tool. And all we have left to do now is remove the penny from this side, and we're going to have to bend up the locking tab here up against one of the flats. Now we're going to go ahead and bend this locking tab up against the flat of the nut. This can be a little tricky to do if you don't have the right tools. As you can see, I just got this lip started here. Now I'm going to use a cold chisel. The cold chisel looks something like that. Get up underneath here and bend this up, and I'll probably end up using a pliers to pinch this together. It'll be a little tricky, so we'll see how this goes. Do my best to keep my head and hands out of the viewfinder here. I'm just going to use pliers, see if I can't snug that up against that nut. Not the prettiest one I've ever done, but for an engine that won't really be used under stress, it'll be fine. Get a little bit better view of that right there. All I need to do now is take the penny out and go ahead and assemble the clutch plates. Alright, we've got the clutch basket all secured. No damage to anything. Both nuts are tightened. This one has just a lock washer on it, by the way. This one spins counterclockwise. That's why it needs a locking tab. This one spins clockwise, so it tends to tighten itself. Okay. Move on to the clutch plates. That'll be in the next video, by the way. As usual, thanks for watching.